The Chicago Bar Association was created back in 1874 as just a general resource to help attorneys network with each other and be successful in their practices. The CBA chose to set up the insurance subsidiary because a lot of the members were asking questions about what types of insurance they should tap into. Who's the best resource for legal malpractice insurance, life insurance, health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. And rather than sending those elsewhere, we figured we'd be a better resource if we just kept it all in-house and they had a familiar face to work with on a regular basis. And we think that it's very important to get the word out and let our members know that we're around to help as a resource. On top of that, we can work with any law firm or any attorney in the United States. When a law firm comes to us for a second opinion on their legal malpractice insurance policy, we're usually able to find them a lower price for the same coverage or better coverage, or in some instances, actually both. We can find a lower price for better coverage, which is obviously the end goal. Insurance is something that not a lot of people know the ins and outs of it, and maybe a smaller firm or a solo attorney needs that consultant to really keep them in line or to provide information to take it off of their plate. They have enough going on dealing with clients, collecting bills, doing everything that makes them successful in their profession. What I'm here to do is to be a resource and really to just provide assistance in something that they are not inherently an expert in.
Should the government help people who can't get jobs? Should the government help people get medical care which they can't otherwise afford? Should the government help education, or should it not? And there's a big debate in our country about the role of government. There were no debates between 1960 and 1976.
Why?
Because the candidates didn't want it and Congress didn't change the law. 1976, the FCC, and I was involved with this, changed its interpretation and said that news events were exempt and a debate should be treated as a news event.
Okay.
That was taken to court and we won.
Right.
But that led to the debates. And the League of Women Voters asked me to organize them. So I became co-chair. And I called a friend of mine, Dean Birch, who had succeeded me later as chairman of the FCC. He was in the Ford White House.
Right.
I called him and I said, would President Ford participate in the debates? He said, I'll call you back. Call me back. He said, President Ford wants to debate. I said, would you tell me why? This is the first time we'd ever have a sitting president participate. He said, Newt, if you're 36 points behind in the polls, what the hell else are you going to do? So then I called Jimmy Carter's people.
Right.
I knew Bob Lipschultz, the president's lawyer. And he said, I'll call you back. He called me back. He said, Jimmy wants a debate. I said, you tell me why? He said, we know we're 36 points ahead, but Jimmy doesn't think the country knows him. And he wants to be, and he's a very confident debater. He debated when he ran for governor, so he wants a debate. Well, so we then negotiated what became the first debate since 1960. I co-chaired it again in 1980. 84, the league and the candidates were not speaking to each other. There were, right. So we organized what is now the Commission on Presidential Debates, which still exists.
Right.
I'm the vice chairman of that with Senator Danforth of Missouri.
Right.
And we've run every debate ever since. We always have the problem of who should be included. What do you do about a Ross Perot? What do you do about a John? So we have a rule that if you have 15% support in the public opinion polls, you'll be included. If you don't, you're not. And that's worked pretty well so far.
That's pretty good.
Yes.
That's wonderful. And do you participate in trying to make sure that public broadcasting has as equal a role in being involved in those as does the big networks?
Yes, I do. In fact, very often we have chosen a public broadcasting person to be the questioner. Jim Lehrer of PBS has done more of the debates than anybody else in the business.
Sure.
And so public broadcasting has a big role.
I love gossip, so give us a good gossip story from one of these.
Well, they get in such arguments about such trivial things.
Yeah.
One time I was negotiating the debates, and one of the representatives of one of the candidates said, "No notes."
No notes.
I said, "All right, what would the other guy say?" He said, "Okay, no notes." Well, then they got nervous about people bringing notes out of their pocket, so they insisted that the candidates be given a certain color paper. Otherwise, they wouldn't allow. It got silly. One time, my favorite story, I was negotiating the debates in 1980, and the negotiator for the Republicans was James Baker, later became Secretary of State, very good lawyer.
Correct.
The negotiator for the Democrats was Robert Strauss,
Okay.
who later became
Secretary of Defense.
right. And we got in an argument about, I don't even remember what it was, but we got to an impasse. And Strauss said, "Excuse me, I have to go to the men's room." And he left. About 3 minutes later, Baker said, "Excuse me, I have to go to the men's room." So he left, and I was there with the women from the League of Women Voters. They came back in about 10 minutes. They had an envelope they pulled out of their pocket. They said, "Here's the deal." These were two Texas lawyers who had known each other. They worked it all out, and they said, "Here it is." And I didn't want to argue. I wanted the debates to go forward. I said, "It's done." And so that was my favorite of the negotiations. Some of them have been very unpleasant.
Oh, I'm sure. Let me switch gears a little bit about your life in the law and the practice of law. You've spent the bulk of your career representing corporations, individuals. What have you done?
I'm one of the last of the generalists.
Okay.
Everybody today is a specialist in this or a specialist in that. I've represented families, businesses, individuals. I've had individuals who came who had been adopted trying to find their real blood parents. I've represented individuals who were being threatened with an undesirable discharge from the military because of their political views. I've represented large companies. I have been privileged to enjoy a career as a lawyer in all sides. My 3 daughters are all lawyers, which surprised my wife and me enormously. We never anticipated that.
How many years have you been married now?
62. And my wife and I are very fortunate to have raised 3 kids. We have grandchildren. So we've had combined a very happy family life with a very busy career.
Well, you've led a life that so many people admire and respect, including a gentleman that I know well and have great admiration for, Abner Mikva.
Abner and I grew up together as kids.
Right. He's a very well-known Chicagoan, as are you, and the two of you have had quite a history together.
Abner and I were in high school together, and we were both competing to be editor-in-chief of the high school paper.
Right.
Abner beat me, but he then appointed me sports editor, which turned out to be better than editor. Then we each went to law school. We served in the military after that. Abner was in the Air Force as an officer. I was in the engineers as a sergeant in the China-Burma India Theater. We came back and went to college and law school. And University of Chicago, where Abner went, recommended him for a job as a law clerk at the Supreme Court.
Right.
Northwestern, where I went to law school, recommended me for the same job. So we each went for an interview. And I met with Justice Minton, who had been on the Seventh Circuit here. And that was when I was on the Supreme Court. And he interviewed me and he said, you know, he said, I'd like to hire you. I like young people from the Middle West. But he said, yesterday I wrote a letter hiring a guy, Miska? I said, Mikva. He said, that's it. And I said, oh, he's my oldest friend. So I called Abner from Washington and told him. He didn't know he had the job. The letter hadn't arrived. Fortunately for me, not long after that, the Chief Justice lost a law clerk, Dan Walker, who later became governor of Illinois.
Oh, goodness.
He was an Annapolis graduate. The Korean War was on. He was called back to the service, so there was a vacancy. And the Chief Justice hired me. So as a result, Abner and I were there together.
Wow.
We were there the same year with Bill Rehnquist, who later became Chief Justice,
Right.
with Warren Christopher, who became Secretary of State.
Right.
We had a very distinguished group who were with us at that time.
And you worked on some really important matters for our nation at that time. One of them, as I recall, Brown versus Board of Ed.
Yes, Brown was pending, but it it kept getting postponed. Finally got decided after we left. We were there during the steel seizure case. That's when President Truman seized the steel industry because there were strikes threatened.
Right.
And the issue was, did the president, under our Constitution, have the authority as president to do that? And the Supreme Court, by a vote of 6-3, overruled the President of the United States.
Wow.
A very important case.
Well, contrast that with what President Reagan did with firing all the air traffic controllers.
Yes.
He took over that industry.
He took it over, and of course, the controllers had promised not to strike,
Right.
and they had violated the law.
Right.
And
that was the key difference.
that was the key difference.
Right. You know, I can't help but think, at the risk of being patronizing, about how fortunate we are as a city and a nation that someone like you devoted so much time to public service. And I say that, and then I lament the fact that a lot of our young people today are staying out of public service because we seem to demonize everyone who tries to put their name forward.
Well,
What do you think about all that?
Adlai Stevenson and John F. Kennedy always said, politics is an honorable profession. And John F. Kennedy said everybody should spend part of their life in some form of public service, whether it's serving on the school board or whether it's park board or whatever. Somebody should, everybody. I believe that very deeply.
Right.
I believe that part of the role of being a citizen in a free country is that every one of us must contribute somehow to the public service. Unfortunately, and I think it's because of Vietnam, Watergate, everybody became very cynical, particularly the press.
Right.
Journalists began to believe that everybody in public life was either a crook or was somehow taking advantage of things. They became very cynical about public servants and regarded everybody as having bad motives and didn't believe anybody. Instead of trusting what a public servant said, they started off with the idea, they must be lying to us. That has unfortunately sickened the political process, in my opinion. Even though I'm a Democrat, a lifetime Democrat, I admire and respect anyone who will be willing to run for office. I often support Republicans if I think that they're the best candidate. Senator Percy just died. We were very involved with
What a
Senator
nice man he
Percy's
was.
campaign. In fact, I'll tell you a funny television story about Senator Percy if you've got the time. But the need for all of us to devote some of their time and effort to public service is essential if we're going to survive as a country.
All right. Tell us about Senator Percy. I've met him a couple of times, and I just walked away saying, wow, what an impressive individual.
So even though I'm a Democrat, we supported Senator Percy. One Saturday, I was home. Senator Percy called me. He said, "Are you busy today?" And I said, "No." He said, "Will you do me a favor?" He said, "I'm going to be in a television appearance, a joint appearance, with my opponent, my Democratic opponent, Congressman Roman Puczynski. It's going to be on Channel 9 in about an hour. It's going to be live. Would you watch it? And when it's over, I'm going to call you. I want to get your advice." I said, "Fine." Well, it was a Saturday, and I tuned it in, and I was in our library room. We have a big sofa, and it was a Saturday. I was tired. I lay down on the sofa. I watched it for about 15 minutes. It was exceedingly dull, and I fell asleep. The end of the program, Senator Percy called me back. He said, "Did you watch it?" I said, "Chuck, I have to be honest with you. I watched the first 15 minutes or so, but I was tired. I was on the couch. I fell asleep." He said, "Oh." He said, "Well, here's my question." He said, "I don't think I did very well in that hour." He said, "And my agreement with Congressman Puczynski and WGN was that program would be broadcast once, and that was it. Puczynski wants me to release it so it can be made available to all the television stations. What do you think?" I said, "Chuck, if you say no, the press is going to be after you and saying, 'What have you got to hide?' There's going to be a front page story. Percy hiding won't let the program be on." He said, "Yeah, but I don't want it to be on." I said, "Well, I think what you could do is say, okay, it can be rebroadcast on one condition. It has to be broadcast entirely unedited for the full hour." I said, "No other station will take it." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I can't guarantee it, but I said, my judgment is no other station will take it but if you say no, you're going to be in trouble." He said, "Are you positive?" And I said, "I think so." Well, he tried that, and of course, no other station put it on. That was the end of it. So Senator Percy now regarded me as his television advisor. But I always remember that because he was, I think he would have been in trouble if he had said no.
You were able to combine, if you will, your undergraduate degree and your legal studies, and you saved a little time there. Why aren't we doing that anymore?
Well, as I look back about it, what I did, I went to Northwestern, and at that time, if you got into Northwestern Law School, your first year of law school would count as your fourth year of college. And I was in such a rush to get through school, trying to make up time for the time I spent in World War II in the military, which I look back at today and it was foolish because I never felt that I got the kind of education that I wish I'd had. So that's why I try to keep learning now to catch up with it.
You're quite, you read, I've been in your office and books everywhere. What are the favorite things that you look into and like to study and read about?
Well,
escape to?
I try to read everything. I read, I try to read a book a month. I read too many magazines. I spend too much time. we counted one time, I think we get 18 magazines at home. I read 4 newspapers every day.
Wow.
I watch, my wife says I can do 2 things at once. I can keep the television on and watch it and read, which I probably don't do perfectly, but I've always wanted, I was just watching in Jackie Kennedy's interview that was just made public when she was talking about her husband. She said he reads even when he's eating. He reads all the time.
Right.
And I think admire that. I think I'm the same way.
Yeah. Did you know the father, Joseph Kennedy?
Yes, I did. In
What
fact,
was he like?
Well, I met him before Jack Kennedy was president.
Right. Was he this tough guy that's we've seen him portrayed
Well,
in the series?
I had a wonderful experience with him. He, the day I gave that very controversial Vast Wasteland speech,
Right.
I had 2 phone calls that night at home. One was from Ambassador Kennedy.
Right.
And I picked up the phone. They said, the White House calling, Ambassador Kennedy on the phone. I thought, oh, here it comes. I'm going to catch hell for this. He says, Newt, he said, I think your speech was the best speech since my son's inaugural address. And I've told him that. And he said, you keep it up. If anybody gives you any trouble, you call me. Goodbye.
Pretty good.
The other phone call was from Edward R. Murrow, who called me and he said, you stole my speech. I said, what do you mean? He said, you don't know about my speech I gave in Chicago 2 years ago? And I said, no. He said, I'll send you a copy. And he said, he gave a better speech than I did, but it was the same message about the public responsibilities of broadcasters. It was the same speech.
If you had to give that speech tomorrow, would you say the same thing?
I think I would. I think the speech was in many ways misunderstood.
Right. Well, this is your chance before 8 million people to clear the air.
What I was really saying to the broadcasters was, you got to remember the context. This was 1961. In the late 50s, television had 2 scandals in a row. It had the quiz show scandals where there was corruption. It had the payola scandals where people were paying disc jockeys to play their records for money. There were scandals at the FCC. There was corruption. President Eisenhower had to fire the FCC chairman to get rid of him. There was a mess. There was a mess in the industry. There was a mess in the regulatory body. It was not a wholesome place. So I felt it was important to change the atmosphere, change the environment. And I wanted to remind the broadcasters what an extraordinary privilege they had been given. They'd been given the exclusive license to use public property, part of the spectrum, to keep everybody else off. They could have exclusive, in exchange for a bargain, that they would serve the public interest. That was the bargain.
All right.
They were making millions and millions of dollars using public property exclusively, and they had to give something back in the form of public service. That was my message. That got lost in the 2 words, vast wasteland.
Right.
The 2 words I cared about were public interest. That's the words in the statute, in the law that governs broadcasting. But people forgot that, and they only wanted to talk about vast wasteland.
Well, you have certainly exemplified public interest in not only the way you conduct yourself and your career, but everything you've done. You know, one of the, at the beginning of the show, I mentioned that you were the recipient of the John Paul Stevens Award, and that Chicago Bar Association gives out in honor of Justice Stevens, fellow Chicagoan. And this past Monday, we announced the winners of that, many of whom you know, but when we give someone that award, We do it because of their professionalism, their commitment to integrity of the legal responsibility that we all cherish and we all hopefully are doing in a way that exemplifies civility and credibility and honor. And so for you to be one of the original recipients of that, and I know that I spoke to one of the recipients this week, and I read to her the names of those people, and she said, I'm humbled to be in the kind of league with the likes of Newton Menow and some of the others. So,
Well, you know, Justice Stevens was finishing law school when I started.
okay.
And I met him there. And later years, at the Aspen Institute, I took a course that he taught called Justice and Society. And it was the most intellectually challenging thing I've ever undertaken. We used to play tennis in the afternoon with Justice Stevens and his wife. He is a great, great man and a example of what all of us would dream to be as lawyers.
And on that note, thank you, Newt. Newton Menow, we've had a great experience with you today. I can't believe that the hour went by so quickly. We've all enjoyed listening to you and the remarkable stories that you had to tell us. So thank you for your years of service.
Bob,
and thank you for your thoughtful insights today.
To be here with you and to be with the president of the Chicago Bar Association, leading us in new ways, is an honor for me.
Well, thank you, sir. Folks, I'm Bob Clifford. Thank you for watching the Chicago Bar Association's Justice and Law Weekly.
When you need a lawyer, how do you find the right one? Contact the Chicago Bar Association.
Whether you've been injured or need a will prepared, whether you're buying a home or starting a business, having the right lawyer is essential. The Chicago Bar Association have lawyers who practice in most areas of law and speak a variety of languages.
Don't leave it to chance. Get a referral to a screened, experienced lawyer. Visit chicagobar.org or call 312-554-2001. The Chicago Bar Association. Se habla español.
Do you or someone you know owe your boss or recruiter money? Is someone forcing, tricking, or coercing you or someone you know to work or to engage in sex acts in exchange for favors or money? Has your boss threatened to hurt you, deport you or someone you know, or hurt someone else if you leave your job? Is someone holding your passport or ID cards? If so, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline for help at 1-888-3737-888. Calls are confidential and interpreters are available.
This announcement has been brought to you by the Young Lawyers section of the Chicago Bar Association and the Cook County Human Trafficking Task Force.